You're listening to China Manufacturing Decoded from the Sofeast Group. Hello, welcome back to the podcast, episode 287 today. Adrian and Renaud joining you once again. And Renaud, today we're going to talk a little bit around a news article that I've read recently this week from Reuters. And in fact, I also listened to a podcast on The Guardian as well about the manufacturing sector in China right now as of August 2025. And in particular, the effect that the tariffs and the wider trade war with the USA has been having on this sector and some of the ways that it's affecting sort of manufacturing on the factory floor, should we say. And it's no secret, right? If you've been watching the news or you've looked at any news articles, it's widely reported that the economy generally in China has been affected negatively by the trade war going on with the States. That's not a secret and nobody can deny that, right? But as a buyer, a lot of people are still buying from China, of course. And so what should you be mindful of, given that the manufacturing sector is being affected in some kind of different and unexpected ways? You know, how can you protect yourself and your interests? Are there some things that you need to think about that perhaps you wouldn't have been so, up to date with? Well, you're there on the ground, right? And so I'd like to get your sense of what you're seeing on a day-to-day in China as well.
First also, I just wanted to add the trade war, whatever, the tariffs back and forth and so on. Well, I've heard China, I've also heard the USA, right? A lot of instability, a lot of confusion about what's happening. Of course, companies are not investing with a clear mind and a lot of hopes. It's not the same as, let's say, normal times. The stock market took a hit, the dollar went down, etc., etc. Okay, but it's not. We're not talking about the economy in general here. We're talking about the activity in these factories, right?
Yeah.
What is the impact? So you start the year with whatever. Let's say 20% tariff. Okay, carried over from the Biden era. Sorry, the Trump one. Actually,
yes,
Trump
and
one.
then Biden continued it.
Yeah. So a lot of products were, let's say, roughly 20%. Okay. Then you go 30, 40. Then you go, whatever, 55 or something. And then you go 100 something percent. Wow. Okay. So suddenly, what happened is that a lot of buyers, when Trump got elected, bought higher quantities, like place larger POs.
Yes.
And that means what, November, December? That means production in production of finished goods, let's say before Chinese New Year, was as high as ever because a lot of companies wanted to replenish their inventory and, as they say, like front load basically in advance because they could feel that things might get a bit nasty for some time. So let's buy more. Let's get more production going. Okay. So factory is very busy. Chinese New Year, some stuff still for after Chinese New Year because not everything could be produced that fast. Okay. So they come back and they rehire and whatever, end of February, March. Then, when was that? April, Liberation Day. And then the tit for tat, let's go up 100% plus. But suddenly everybody's freezing like, oh, okay, I was right to buy stuff in advance. Now, I'm only going to buy what I really, really, really have to use or deliver to my customers. So the volume of production for the USA going down, whatever, 80%, 90%. Some of them playing little games, shipping DDP, undervaluing the product, etc. Okay, now the US customers are going after them, of course, because in many cases it's not that difficult. You see a product, the same product was sold at a certain price, and then suddenly the price drops a lot just at that time. I mean, of course, this is like a red flag to attract the customs authorities, right? But still, the overall volume went down maybe 80% for 1-2 months. Then, okay, Geneva, some kind of agreement. It goes down. Okay, there's a window of opportunity again before things get nasty, and let's buy more. Okay, so companies again busy rehiring, producing more in let's say around July. And then now, okay, it might go up again in August, or actually they just say that they would extend, but we can see there's some friction with whatever, the magnets, there's some export controls and so on and so forth. Now China is playing tough. So who knows what's going to happen? But if people are stuffed with a lot of inventory, they're not going to buy more in the short term, and probably they already bought. So
what that has a ripple effect on what happens in China.
Yeah. So it's up, down. It's like stop, go, stop.
It's a seesaw, isn't it?
Like stop. Yeah, I'm not ordering anything for a while, and then go super fast, as we can, and then again, stop. Or good, volume goes down 80%. Okay, that has a bigger impact on the manufacturers, and the more upstream you go, the bigger the impact, right? So supply chain management students have probably done that game, like a simulation called the beer game. But there's a bunch of ways to simulate that. If you order a lot and then you stop, and then you order a lot and you stop, these kind of fluctuations actually get amplified the further up the supply chain. So your direct manufacturer might have, especially if they produce a lot for the USA, 1 month would be 2 or 3 times as busy as the previous one, and then again down to a low level and so on. But then their suppliers see even wider variations. It's crazy. Or if we look in one factory that is vertically integrated, so let's say, for example, in the past I remember I did some work with a wheelchair factory, and that wheelchair, so they were making wheelchairs, but then they were stitching the fabric, and then they were doing molding the rubber, and then they, for example, just looking at the metal parts. So the metal parts went into the final product, but then before that they were powder coated and drilled and blah blah blah. Okay, there were a number of different operations, and just inside the factory already the upstream operations like powder coating sometimes was very busy, sometimes not busy at all. Whereas in assembly, it was more leveled, right? More regular. So that they have a name for that. It's what is it called? The whiplash effect or something like that. Like a whip. When you use you whip whatever, a horse or whatever, right? The amplitude of the whip is going up the further from the hand, right? So that's the idea. And that has a lot of very bad impacts on manufacturing, right? Because the manufacturing facility, a typical manufacturing facility, you have a bunch of fixed costs, right? So you rent the place, you bought some equipment, it's amortized over time. You have a workforce. Some of it is going to be stable, right? I mean, you can't just run out of temporary labor. You can't control quality, you can't control a lot of things, right? So you have this part of the workforce at least is stable, and so on and so forth. Well, you have the office, so most of the people in the office will be like full-time labor and not temporary, like in and out, right? So all of that is very much a fixed cost. And what you want when you're doing manufacturing, you want to be maybe at 90% capacity, right? So let's take a car factory, because a lot of people at least have been reading that or visiting car factories. Well, when you run an automotive factory, you have very heavy fixed costs, right? If you run at 50% capacity, so let's say you can make 300,000 cars a year, but in that plant, but you making 150,000 vehicles, that's a big problem. you are not at break even. Very probably you're not at break even, right? But if you are at 350, like 100% capacity, as soon as whatever, like maybe you can't even do preventive maintenance, and then you have catastrophic breakdowns that are unplanned, etc., etc. Like you don't have time to put the staff aside, give them some projects, train the staff, and so on. That also is a bit of a problem. But if you take all of that into account, let's say maybe the theoretical optimum is 100% capacity. But then if with that whiplash effect that we mentioned, sometimes they're running at 50% capacity or 30% capacity, and sometimes they have orders that represent 200% capacity or 150% capacity, right? So what do? Well, they look for ways to subcontract some of the work, right? Well, it happens in automotive, like, Toyota. Even Toyota is supposed to be the best. Like they found another automotive supplier that, is willing to to do a good job and is also really excellent, is called Subaru. So, Toyota will subcontract some work to Subaru. If Subaru's plants have extra capacity and Toyota is looking for that kind of capacity. But that's kind of, in a very, very controlled manner, right? Subcontracted in another factory that has really good culture, really good values, really good performance, right? You can do that, and it's part of a long-term agreement. But here, what we're referring to is different. It's like, oh, damn, my customers need us to send whatever. We can make, I don't know, 200,000 pieces of, I don't know, iPhone cases per month. But now we've got to deliver, 180,000. Well, how do we do with this extra 80% that we cannot do? Like, we're not going to buy a bunch of new plastic injection molding presses and all that stuff and hire new staff, because 2 months later, they might only need us to deliver 50,000, right? So you start to go around and subcontract to some other factories, usually based on price. That's the, typical, you try to negotiate a deal, right? And these other, so who will get the business? Some other aggressive subcontractor. And aggressive subcontractors themselves, maybe they can only ship 100,000, and then because they're aggressive, suddenly they have 130,000 to deliver. But they will also subcontract. I mean, how do you control quality, and how do you control on-time delivery in that case, right? Well, so the answer is you can't, or very badly, right? In most cases. So that is just a recipe for big problems. And some of the, like the article you mentioned, related some of these issues, right? Maybe you can relate some of that. They had some good examples.
Yes. Well, Chinese factories basically have been having to find ways, I was going to say constructive ways, but I think some of the staff effective or the businesses effective might argue that, but they've been having to find ways to kind of cope with the different effects that tariffs are having, because there's been so much uncertainty. It's gone up and down. So as you mentioned, how do you run a stable business when you don't know what amount of manufacturing you're going to be doing? Because you want to be at, say, 90% capacity, but one moment you're at 100+%, and then the next moment you're at way under what you want to be at. So how do you keep things stable? Well, in this article, there was a kitchen cabinet factory that was referenced to begin with, and he wants to cut his wage costs by 30% to be competitive, right? Because he's not getting US orders, or not as many. So how does he do it? He halves his workforce, and now he is asking workers basically to work less. So they're taking unpaid leave and doing shorter shifts. And what they're saying is this is a deflationary force in China, which obviously isn't going to help the economy, which is already, difficult. So the boss of that factory, which is in Guangzhou, he's saying, look, guys, we're in this together. work a bit less. I can't pay you as much either, obviously, but we'll then be able to keep going. I mean, that's one example. That's a bit of a nightmare as a business owner, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's pretty bad.
Mm.
Yeah, they also had some other examples, right?
Yeah. So another one is you mentioned temporary workers, and I suppose there are pros and cons to temporary workers. I mentioned it at the top of the podcast because, I've seen them in our area where there's guys queuing up in the morning, and there's perhaps a couple of people on a desk on the side of the street with a few jobs, and they're talking to people who are just sort of queuing up for day work, I guess, or at least temporary
Mm.
work. And what they do is instead of having their permanent staff, they're cutting those permanent staff, and then they're bringing in temporary workers to fill the gap as and when they need to. I mean, you don't need me to mention the negatives of that. You know that full well as
Yeah,
we're running a
basically.
manufacturer.
Yeah. So, there's some variation in the volume of order. So if you have, let's say, 80% stable workforce, and then you hire, because there's temporary workers and temporary workers, right? There's some
Mm,
of them, they're not going to stick for long. Okay. And usually they don't care that much. They don't really have plans to stick even for 6 months or 1 year in your company. That's a problem. And then there's companies that employees that you hire through a dispatch company, which is very, very common in China.
yes.
And some of them, you pay for their social security, you do things like that. You kind of gauge if they're like, yeah, okay, this is a good place. Yeah, I'm good. Let's see, like they care basically, right? So
Mm,
it's not black or white. And of course, the dispatch company workers, like after 3 months, if really you need to stop having them basically on your payroll, yeah, you tell the dispatch company, hey, I don't need these guys anymore. Like put them in another factory, right? So it's not black or white, but the problem in these factories is that maybe there's an increase, a, a big wild increases in the workforce. So that's actually very common in toys and a number of industries that tend to be very seasonal. So they know that there's a lean, there's like let's say a valley,
mm,
for 5, 6 months, they will not be very busy. Like if you make barbecues for the US markets, right?
yeah.
Let's say a factory makes barbecues mostly for the US market. Well, they know that you're going to be producing a lot of barbecues, starting, let's say, November. That's for sure.
Yes.
They're going to be very busy around Chinese New Year, etc. And then, it's good to be in the stores in May, maybe in June for the north of the US, but,
Mm,
uh, you know, and, and then maybe from July, August, it's a very low season for them, right?
mm,
And then add to that the fact that there's also these tariffs, then I mean,
mm,
these poor people, I don't know how they start their factories and how they plan for their capacity and everything. But that means maybe in the low season, typically this kind of factory, maybe they will have whatever, let's say 50 people, okay, that they keep. And then in the high season, maybe they have 200 people,
mm,
right? And that's really tough. That's
yeah.
really, really tough, right?
I
These
think I
two,
think what
yeah.
I think what we're seeing though, right, is kind of a transition from permanent staff to using more of the temporary staff, which has potential drawbacks because of the
Yeah.
uncertainty.
Oh, yeah. No, if suddenly you have these super high tariffs and half of your market is the USA, well, I mean, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna keep a lot of people on staff if you're already short on cash, let's say, right? Because a lot
Mm,
of factories are still short on cash. Uh, so yeah, they're gonna dismiss a lot of people, and then
mm,
business comes back, but they don't know how long it's gonna take. So they don't want to rehire for the long run.
mm,
Usually they just want to hire some people, let's see, maybe in a couple of months we stop. But the big problem is, the big risk is when they start to use all these new workers. There's no way to when you go from 50 to 200 workers, there's no way you really get them trained properly and everything, except if you have really, really strong training, onboarding programs and everything, which usually they don't. It's kind of, oh, you already have some experience doing whatever, welding or something. Okay, yeah, let's hire you and let's see, on the job kind of validation of your skills and training, like give you feedback. Yeah, that's your training, Usually in 98% of Chinese factories, that's the way it's done.
And this is an important part to get onto, right? Because as I mentioned when we started, I want to give a sense of what the risks are to you as a buyer from the kind of the situation on the ground in manufacturing in China now. So we've set the scene, and if you're listening in the States, for example, you might not exactly be aware of this. You might not know exactly how manufacturers are having to sort of like wriggle and squirm to sort of make things work at the moment. Not all, but some. And it does have, as I mentioned, that ripple effect. So if you're a buyer, and you're working with manufacturers who are potentially being affected by tariffs in this way, and you mentioned before where orders perhaps might be coming in droves and then suddenly dry up, right? So my understanding is this would be technically called order bunching. And so that's where you go over capacity very, very quickly, perhaps, right? It's common sense. It's common sense that you might end up having quality issues or something like that, because suddenly the factory's working at a slow pace, and then suddenly it's all hands to the pump, and you're bringing in temporary workers who perhaps aren't very well trained. And as a buyer, perhaps you need to be cognizant of that and be a bit cautious, because you could end up with some issues, right?
Yeah. So people who've had experience dealing with China for, a long time, they know that they have to watch out for Chinese New Year. Like before Chinese New Year is like, everybody is trying to front load inventory. Factories are very busy. There's some trouble in the supply chain. Like some of the component suppliers are already closed or closing soon, whatever. Like people are rushing the orders. There's a risk here. There's a risk. There's a big quality risk, and of course, there's on-time delivery risk, because if they're late, well, it's going to be shipped after CNY, right? And which adds to the rush and hurts quality even more, because Chinese suppliers are not dumb. They know if they are late by 2 weeks or 1 month, the buyer would definitely notice that and be really upset.
Yeah.
If quality suffers, well, sometimes they don't even get any feedback. So let's roll the dice, right? We don't know. Maybe it's okay with them. We don't really know the situation anyway. It's part of the problem, right? So maybe it's not that bad. Okay, let's just ship it out, because we'll see. Maybe it's okay. But if we delay, if we wait to do it better, yeah, they would definitely get mad. So there's the issue of before Chinese New Year. So again, that's kind of like in the periods when the buyers try to front load inventory, and then there's the period after Chinese New Year, where in some places, the factories that are not very attractive to the employees, and the employees don't want to come back and everything. Sometimes they need to rehire 50% of the workforce. Well, sometimes up to sometimes 80% of the operators, right? Don't want to come back, so new ones have to be hired. So, ouch, right? So this has been going on for years and years, and people know before Chinese New Year, you need to discuss with the supplier about their production capacity. What is their plan? Have them sort of get some forecast early on, so they can also give forecasts to their suppliers to get the materials, the components, everything on time. And they know that they need to make sure that there's going to be quality control inspections and testing and so on, because weird stuff happens in that at that time. And then after CNY, there's a lot of people working that have not been trained very carefully. And you know what? Sometimes you have operators that have not been trained working on products that then get inspected by inspectors who also have not been trained properly, right? So it's like it's full of holes everywhere. The quality system sometimes is like totally ineffective for a couple of months until they kind of get back on their feet more or less, right? So whatever they produce right after, it's a bit like rolling the dice sometimes, right? So again, talking with the supplier, knowing, okay, so how many new people in production, how many new people in quality control, blah, 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 and then if you see there's a risk, well, you're going to have to, go there, send your people, send an inspection company, just to keep an eye on what they're doing, right? I mean, yeah, before Chinese New Year, usually our inspectors are most busy, and then it's pretty quiet during Chinese New Year, and then for a while after Chinese New Year, and then it picks up. But a lot of our clients, they know, yeah, we need to do extra monitoring because it's a period of change, and change brings about risk, and it's very, very clear. So people have experience; they already know all this stuff, and then you just need to put two and two together. With these stop and go because of tariffs. Same thing is happening. And even if you're a buyer, let's say located in the UK, you need to know which of your suppliers are impacted because some of their big customers are in the US. Because this is impacting the factory and this is impacting you and your orders, right? I think that's the big message here.
Absolutely. Because if they've cut a bunch of their staff because they're not getting their big orders from the US or as many, right, even though you're buying into the UK, that could impact you because have they lost a lot of their experienced staff, line leaders and people that are really well trained? Are they trying to fill a gap with temporary staff? Are they taking QC staff off the line and saying like, sorry guys, roll up your sleeves, you've got to start, packing boxes now, and so they're not doing the level of inspections that are needed and things like that. All of these things could totally be happening.
Oh yeah. It's like, nobody can really guess everything that can happen. It's just a period where even the supervisors and leaders and so on might be new, and they might come with the habits from their previous suppliers, their previous employers. So who knows what they do?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, another point to make, I think, as well, would be in terms of material and components that could be affected as well, because if there's a surge in demand and your supplier runs out of your materials, then do they switch to something else without telling you that is not something that you've already validated? Do they do they bring in a different type of component that it does work, but again, it was not originally designed with the product, so you might end up with reliability issues down the line?
Oh yeah, or safety issues.
Yeah.
They do it for, I don't know, structural steel that is used in construction. And they give you something that doesn't have the same tensile strength, for example.
Right.
Well, that might ruin an entire project and create a lot of safety hazards and so on and so forth. So, and sometimes the product just doesn't work. It's not even about reliability; it's about basic function, because the factory people, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, it's fine. This is not available. Let's just put this. Look, it looks just the same. But then, well, it looks the same doesn't mean works the same way for the intended user in the intended usage. And sometimes you have some big issues, right? And sometimes it's convenient, and it's cheaper. Great, right? Usually they don't check that, they don't check, whatever, the impedance of the batteries. Oh, they don't check whatever the capacity of the electronic component, whatever. Okay, it's fine. And if if we are blamed, we can tell them it's because the other one was not available and they insisted that, timelines were tight and everything. So we have a good excuse. Go ahead and do it, right? In some cases, that's really what Chinese suppliers do, especially if they kind of believe, hey, it's our product, like we developed this product, whatever. They are just a distributor. Like, we don't owe them that information. Like, we're just going to do it. Whatever contract they signed, right? You get to understand if that's in the DNA of the supplier, if that's how they think, well, nobody's going to think of telling you, right? In general, they will try to keep it to themselves. When they change a material component, when they change the manufacturing process, whatever. Oh, this plating supplier that we usually use, oh, they're very busy now, or they're closing, or whatever. Okay, we switch to the other one. The result is nearly the same. Okay, lah, right? and then maybe color-wise, it's nearly the same. Well, maybe the customer is not happy still. Maybe they don't agree that it's the same. But maybe, I don't know, it's, the content of nickel is a bit different and so on. And maybe it doesn't pass certain tests, like maybe perspiration is something that is against the skin sometimes, and the perspiration, the sweat, right? Just get the coating out very fast. After 6 months, a lot of the plating is gone. Ouch, right? Oh, but it's still plating, right? It looked the same. Yeah, but it's not really the same kind of plating. So, anyway, too many examples here to go through. Everything comes to my mind, but the idea is you need to watch what happens like a hawk, right? And that's where it comes back to visibility in the supply chain and control, right? If you don't have visibility in the first place, well, forget about any kind of control. Or at least you need to know what you need to check and what you need, how do you need to test the parts and the product. And that might be a way to catch some of the differences, right? Typical, ongoing reliability testing typically. And might pick up on some differences in some components from one batch to the next. And there's a lot of other things that can be done in the same way. But you kind of need to have a theory about, hey, what could go wrong and what can we test, in a relatively simple way that is still realistically, economically feasible. Right? So, as a buyer, you need to do some work, basically.
Yeah, even more than before, with the seasonality of your industry, you'd be aware of that. With the Chinese New Year, you would hopefully be aware of that. But now we're contending with even more instability throughout the year at perhaps random times at the whim of Mr. Trump, for example. So, yeah, absolutely. Busy times for auditing and inspection staff, I'm sure.
Yeah, right. That's a period where, how to say, everybody is thinking a bit more short term, and there's a lot of unpleasant surprises flying around, and the relationships become more transactional also, which does not help, right? So if you pick the right suppliers, etc., you still need to let them feel that there's a relationship and that it's not supposed to be very transactional, just always in the short term, what's the next order? You need to get them to want to do business with you over the long run, right? But they need to feel that it's not purely a transactional relationship. That's one thing that will help. And again, pick the right suppliers. We always come back to that. Pick the right suppliers, and if necessary, do some of the sourcing work, etc., to have visibility in the supply chain and get the right contracts. Right. So, also one thing that can really help, taking a page from the industries where demand is usually very seasonal. I remember we did a lot of work for a German company buys a lot of toys from different countries, a lot of them from China. And what they do is quite amazing, is that they're in the toy industry, and of course, Christmas is a big season for them. But they will level the amount of production year round, so that it is a regular amount of production, year round. Like toy factory is busy, in January, in March, right? In April. Usually they're not busy. It's the low season. Even December is the low season. But they keep them busy so that the workers can remain the same, everything the same. They minimize the changes in their supply chain. They are seen as a good customer. Now, of course, does it take more cash? Yeah, because there's a lot of inventory they need to keep, no doubt. And they need to finance production earlier, no doubt. But, quality and reliability is very important to them. And they have the margins that allow them to do that. So it works pretty well for them. So yeah, when you have tariffs, but you think the tariffs just going to last for 1 to 3 months, maybe the best thing you can do is to finance the suppliers so that they keep producing, but they don't ship yet, right? And some companies have been doing that, like, keep producing, ship it to Canada, ship it to Mexico, ship it to a what do they call it, like a bonded warehouse in the US. And then when the amount of tariff goes down, let's introduce it on the US market and pay the lower tariffs at that time. Some people have done that. I thought it was a smart approach.
Yeah, good idea. Great. So food for thought, if you're buying from China, regardless of whether you're in the States or not. I would make a point just saying we're recording on August the 14th, 2025. And I do believe that they've just, the 3-month period before the tariffs were supposed to raise again has now been frozen once again for another 90 days, I believe, by the Trump administration. And China has also said, okay, fine, we will also pause our reciprocal tariffs by another 90 days. So I guess in the sort of final quarter or so of 2025, the US and China are going to try and work out some sort of a deal, and hopefully things will become a bit more stable.
Everything we say is not just about China, right?
No.
Other places where, like Vietnam, so, tariffs go up a lot and then down a lot. Like now it's India, and then hopefully it's going to come down very soon.
Yep.
And so who's the next, who's next in line to be attacked, to be bullied, right?
Yes, good points. Because the advice goes regardless of where you're buying from, because there may be instability. Yeah.
Right.
Very good. Thanks, Renaud, and thanks to all the listeners. We will be back next week. Thanks again for listening to this podcast, brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share, because it will really help others discover us too.